everybody, thanks for coming back to Dave's World. All the support I get from everybody, I really appreciate it. When I started my channel, I had no idea it was going to be somewhat popular. So my first couple videos I ever put up were about the Cruise and the Jetta, and I actually wasn't going to continue the Jetta footage because I wasn't sure if they were good videos. But the feedback I got was fantastic. So because of my subscribers kind of asking me to keep putting the footage up because they wanted to see the build from beginning to end, I want to put it up for everybody. And I really appreciate the feedback that everyone's been giving me. So this video that I'm putting up today is about an AEM air-fuel ratio gauge. The reason why that's important is the last video I posted was the actual first startup after I put the turbo in and I primed the engine. And this video is going to be the first road test. But what I wanted to do before the road test was install an AEM wideband air-fuel ratio gauge. What a wideband is a more accurate air-fuel ratio gauge. So if you had a regular air-fuel ratio gauge, all they really do is kind of bounce lean, rich, lean, rich, lean, rich, but it doesn't actually show you what the actual air-fuel ratio is in your exhaust. This style gauge shows you exactly what the air-fuel ratio is during cruising and wide open throttle. The reason that's important is if you add a larger turbo to a car, sometimes the computer can allow for the change and keep the air-fuel ratios correct at all times. But you'll never actually know what's going on in those cylinders, which is why I always add air-fuel ratio gauges to all of my builds. In this situation, you'll actually see that the engine was running lean. You'll see in the video that I took video of me on the road test. I took video installing the gauge, so if you're putting one of these in a Jetta, I show how to put in a column pod. That's a gauge pod that'll go on a steering column, how to modify the pod to fit the gauge. There was some fitment issues, so I show how to modify the gauge. I show how to install the gauge and wire it up. And if you have a 1999 through 05 Jetta, this will work for your car, which is why I put this video series together. So I just want to let you know, I did film this stuff in the winter, but I wanted to continue the series for everybody who's following along on my build. And what I'm going to do is show that footage for you now. Now, the beginning of the footage is a little finicky because it was old footage and I didn't know that there was a little bit of a glitch in the video, so I couldn't go back and reshoot it because the car's been done for a couple months now. But it goes away after like 2 minutes. So it was still, the rest of it's fantastic footage. Just in the beginning, it's a little finicky. I was using a different camera back then and I actually got rid of that camera because I thought it was awful. The camera I'm using now is awesome. So hopefully you guys enjoy that footage. I'm going to play it for you now, and then after footage is over, we'll talk about it. So as you can see, the sensor is already installed. Now this is a no weld O2 sensor bunge that I actually made. There's a video that I put out showing how to make one of those. The reason I made one is because this was a stainless pipe, and being that it was stainless, I was concerned about it being too thin. So if I were to weld the O2 sensor bunge to it, I was worried about it melting it. This ended up being a really thick pipe. I probably could have just welded to it without a problem. So the sensor needs to be installed in this position. So it's clocked in a way that if there's condensation coming down the pipe, because there is moisture that comes out of the exhaust, it will not affect this sensor in any way. That's why these are clocked in a sort of an upward position. I decided to put this as close to here as possible because that's the optimal spot potentially on this engine. They do call that if you're putting one of these air-fuel ratio gauge sensors in the exhaust, that you want to be within a foot of the cylinder one bank. Being that this only has one bank, I decided to take it as a foot from the turbo. I didn't want to be too close to the turbo because of the exhaust temperatures. The other thing is I wanted to make sure once we installed this that we had enough harness to actually get into the firewall in the car. So the next thing I want to do is actually get the car back on the ground, start taking the interior apart and figuring out where we could pass through the firewall to get to the sensor. Okay, so when you're running the AEM harness, I always like to run it through the firewall from the outside because this is the small end. The other side is much bigger and it's harder to get through the firewall usually. This is the part that actually hooks to the sensor. Now, I have this tool. This tool is actually specially designed for passing things through the firewall. All right, so here's inside the car. I'm just literally pulling this harness down. Okay, so I grabbed the gauge pod and just laid it in place, but it's one of these column style. It literally just pops on top of the column, and you could just use double-sided tape, and you can run the harness down underneath the dash under to here and get your power sources at the fuse panel. This gauge doesn't quite fit. I have to modify the hole that this goes in. What I usually do is use a Dremel, and what I want to do is run this through here to make the hole a little bigger. These Okay, the next thing I want to do is get the harnesses on this gauge and put the gauge on the steering column, and then figure out how we're going to power this thing up. So the AAM gauge has 2 wire harnesses in the back of it. One of them is for the O2 sensor, which is underneath the car, and the other one is for powering the gauge. The cool thing about this gauge is also auto dims, so at night there's a little light sensor that dims it for you, so you don't have to worry about using a dim harness. All right, now what you want to do is hook the harnesses up in the right spot. And then you can put your gauge in. And you want to tuck your harnesses in. Okay, so that's the AEM gauge in place. What I really like about this gauge is it comes with options. It actually matches a little closer, which I really like. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is tap into the main fuse box, and the easiest way to do this, if you guys are anything like me, you have wiring kits. I like to use these fuse taps. So what I'm going to do is test all of these circuits to see which one gives me battery hot and which one gives me like a switched 12-volt source. Actually, no, we don't need battery hot. So if you look here, we just need 12 volts and the ground. So I'm just going to look for a 12-volt switch source here. So it looks like this is where the other gauge was tapped in up top. So what I'm going to do is use this for both. That looks like it's just a keyed source for like an add-on. What I'm going to do is fuse this and put this in its place and then power both of the gauges. What I want to do is I'm going to feed the new wire harness up through the back and shorten it. Okay, and now these are going to have 12 volts now that I pop this back in place. The other thing I need to do is figure out where I want to do a ground. I want to pull the harness back through so I can get the ground wire to go underneath. If you see here, this view is where your feet go, and I'm looking under the dashboard straight up. Now if you look under the dashboard straight up, there's a mounting bolt right here. This mounting bolt is a good ground for any of your gauges. I'm going to use this bolt. So the gauge is on. Now I'm not finished yet, so please don't get mad that the wires are not perfectly installed yet under the dash, but I want to start it. I want to test the gauge to make sure it's reading the air-fuel ratio. And it is. Okay, so now we have a functioning air-fuel ratio gauge. The next thing I want to do is finish cleaning up the harness under the dashboard, tie everything off, and then literally take the car for its first road test finally. Okay, so I wanted to take everyone on a road test with me. This turbo seems to be producing some good boost. It looks like we're hitting about 23 pounds of boost. And air fuel ratio wise, the turbo, as expected, is making the engine run a little lean. So that was the footage that I shot that day. I cut the road test short because the car was running very lean, and I didn't want to cause any engine damage. You know, when you run an engine lean, you actually overheat the intake temperatures inside the cylinders, and you can seize up an engine, you can crack a piston. I mean, you can do a lot of damage to an engine if you're running around too lean. So I was concerned, and I brought the car back right away. The point of the video is, whenever you're modifying cars, or adding a larger turbo to a Jetta, the air-fuel ratio gauge will help you catch what's going on, because I read online before I even started this project that the car doesn't need a tune. It does need a tune. It should just be a bolt-in process, no big deal, but the car ran fine. So without the gauge, if I threw that turbo in the car and just went for a drive, I would have thought the car was fine and had plenty of power and never would have known that it's actually running lean, and down the road I could actually cause engine failure. So that's why the first thing I did was put that gauge in. So a tune for that car is like $750 to $1,000, but the gauge is like $200, and then the pod is like $50. So let's say I put the turbo in and the air-fuel ratio is fine, $200 well spent. Let's say I put the turbo in and the air-fuel ratio gauge, and I saw that I was running lean. Well, now I saved the car because I caught it before it caused the failure. But let's say I just threw the turbo on there and didn't put the gauge in. There's a chance that down the road I would end up blowing that engine, and I wish I spent that $200. Because now I might have to spend a couple $1,000s to get my car fixed. So that's why I always put those gauges in my cars. You know, my Corvette's got one because this has a supercharger on it and meth injection. So every time I'm driving around, I'm always monitoring my air-fuel ratio gauges. Every car I've ever built that has some sort of engine modifications done always has an air-fuel ratio gauge, because I always like to make sure that the air-fuel ratio is correct. And I've been realizing that there's younger people buying these cars. You might not know that a wideband air-fuel ratio gauge exists or how it even works. And my video might be the first time you've ever seen one. And if I could help you, I have no problem doing it. I actually filmed the video to help, not because I want clicks on YouTube. Unfortunately, when you own a YouTube channel, people just think you're out for clicks. But I'm passionate about what I'm doing. And I want my channel to be something people want to see, not just click on a thumbnail because I want to click. I legitimately am trying to make these videos entertaining and useful for people who are working on their cars, and I hope you enjoy them. So the last thing I like to do is garage updates. I like to let everybody know what projects I'm working on, because I'm posting different videos all the time. You guys saw I'm doing an extreme wide body on this Corvette, and I have an engine over there that I'm taking apart. It's a 4.6 liter that I'm putting into a 65 Mustang. And then yesterday was my birthday, so I was in the middle of throwing a Cobra exhaust on the motorcycle. I was filming it, but I'm not really sure if I even like the footage. It may or may not be on the channel, but at least I can get my motorcycle going. I haven't ridden that thing in about 2 years. I feel bad it's just sitting there. When you have a family, sometimes just life gets in the way. So thanks again, everybody. I really appreciate all the support, and everybody who comments, likes, and subscribes. You guys are amazing. And I make the content for my subscribers. I have a lot of projects, but I take the time out of my day to continue the Jetta footage because of my Jetta subscribers. I truly think about you, and that's why I keep making the content for you. So thanks again, everybody. Have a nice day.